Since we are and have been witnessing the downfall of the Vancouver Canucks, I decided this would be an interesting topic to explore. As much as NHL teams try and avoid them, there's always those few players out there that have the capability to ruin a team. They're usually stars that might be a little self-serving, and therefore not the best teammates. In this video, we're going to go over 4 NHL players that severely crippled their own teams. And with that, here are 4 players that are franchise killers. Mark Messier had the unique ability to literally punish the Canucks first as the opposition, and then as one of their own. Before Messier jerseys were even a thing in BC, the forward had the pleasure of scoring the game-winning goal for the New York Rangers. And this wasn't just any goal, it was a tally that allowed for the Blue Shirts to capture Lord Stanley in 1994. So, as I said, Messier first destroyed them from the other side, but not long after, he had the opportunity to destroy them from the inside as well. In 1997, in the later stages of his career, Messier was signed to a deal. At this point in time, the Canucks had just missed the playoffs for the first time in 6 seasons. Therefore, factoring in his Stanley Cup pedigree, Messier was looked to as the answer for Vancouver moving forward. Unfortunately though, as most of us know, Messier did a lot more damage in BC than anything. Firstly, after signing his contract, Messier decided he was going to wear number 11, despite the fact that it was already previously retired. And to make matters worse, even though the number was unofficially retired, it belonged to Wayne Mackey, a player who is memorialized in this way due to dying tragically from brain cancer after playing just 2 seasons with the team. And despite the protests coming in from the late Mackey's family members, Messier decided to wear number 11 anyways. After receiving the number he wanted, Messier then went to work in pursuit of captaincy, a duty that had been given to Trevor Linden even before thoughts of Messier wearing a Vancouver jersey were even thought of. According to multiple sources, Linden felt that Messier's abrupt invasion of the dressing room was rather hostile. After apparent friction became evident between the two, Linden was then shipped off to Long Island to play for the Islanders. Since he vastly underperformed while playing for Vancouver, Messier then found himself being bought out. However, instead of backing off and moving on, Messier decided to sue the team for around $6 million thereafter. Due to maturing, becoming more self-aware, or both, Messier later apologized for his actions. Despite the attempts at reconciliation though, many Nucks fans didn't accept his pleas for forgiveness years later. After being a staple in Atlanta for around a decade, Ilya Kovalchuk voiced his desire to move on from the Thrashers organization, and in result was traded to New Jersey mid-season in 2010. The former first overall pick was a welcomed addition to the lineup in the Garden State. GM Lou Lamoriello was eager to give his newly acquired player the financial incentive needed for him to hopefully remain with the team. The first attempt at a lengthy deal of 17 years valued at $101 million was immediately rejected by the league, and due to what the league saw as cap circumvention, the Devils were made to pay a $3 million penalty and to surrender a first and third round pick in results. But the second time around was a success, as the Devils and Kovalchuk were able to settle on the term of 15 years and a value of $100 million. Unfortunately though, he wouldn't even come close to playing the full contract out at all, following a trip to the Stanley Cup Finals with the team in 2012. Not long after Kovalchuk, at 30 years of age, formally announced his retirement from the NHL, while stating that the main reason was to remain in Russia and to spend time with his family, which he could have done. Kovalchuk had other plans. Instead of trying to play out the contract or simply retiring and relocating, Kovalchuk decided to resume play in the KHL instead. This didn't exactly sit well with Devils fans. One good thing that did come about, however, due to the premature NHL exit of Kovalchuk, was that the Devils did get a first-round selection in 2014. However, instead of selecting somewhere close to 14th, Lamoriello was given the 30th choice instead. Therefore, looking back today, it's possible that the Devils could have selected Dylan Larkin or David Pastrnak, which would have changed things dramatically. I mean, I feel like most watching automatically would put Jack Eichel into this category in some capacity. Once Eichel arrived in Saberland, it's almost like he knew, due to their longing for star talent and desperation, that they, as in team management, could be exploited. Now, we're definitely not here to say that Eichel didn't help the organization to some extent. Sure, He bolstered ticket sales, excited fans, and contributed offensively, but it's almost like what he did bring to the table was tainted due to the demands that came along with star status. In that, the Sabres tried to some extent to accommodate him. For example, by the time Eichel's rookie season began, management had sought out a new head coach in Dan Bylsma, previously known for his ability to coach star talent such as Sidney Crosby and Evgeny Malkin. Bylsma had experience in winning, as he was behind the bench when Sid the Kid hoisted his first Stanley Cup. Therefore, the idea was that Bylsma would be able to connect with Eichel and guide him through his debut season. Well, by the time Eichel's entry-level contract was about to expire, the friction between player and coach unfolded and found its way into media headlines. According to longtime Sabres reporter Paul Hamilton, Eichel had refused to sign an extension unless Bylsma was fired from his role as coach. Well, Bylsma, along with GM Tim Murray, were both fired the day after Murray met with the owners in April of 2017. From there, Eichel then agreed to terms to an extension that October. However, Eichel wouldn't even come close to finishing the deal out in Buffalo, after years of expressed frustration and unhappiness as a Sabre. The injury that Eichel sustained at the start of the 2020-21 season would be, in his mind, the exit strategy, or at least it turned out that way, since the artificial disc replacement surgery was one that by that time the Sabres weren't willing to consider. Eichel decided he was going to try and go to a team that would allow the newer technique. Interestingly, Eichel later himself said that he requested a trade before his injury came about following the shortened 2019-2020 season. In hindsight, then, it's easier to understand the other side's perspective, aka the Sabres management teams. However, Eichel was finally traded to Vegas, where they allowed him to get the surgery he wanted. Today, looking back, the Sabres suffered the most when Jack Eichel was on the team. Despite the talent and whoever was on the ice, the team wasn't able to be successful. Obviously, the blame isn't all on Eichel's shoulders, but if we look at how the Sabres are doing now versus how they were doing for the entire Eichel era, well, it's almost like night and day.
That's about the loudest I've heard this place ever. Really? After it only took 7 years of me leaving for them to get into the game. But, they must just be booing me because they wish I was still here. I don't know.
When NHL fans use the term Messier 2.0, they're likely referring to JT Miller, and for good reason. Last season, JT Miller seemed to come out of nowhere as he impressed the hockey world with an offensive onslaught. After recording nearly 100 points, with 99, GM Patrick Allvin was so impressed that he gave his player an 8-year deal. Trusting Miller with this much term was definitely a gamble, especially considering the fact that this choice pretty much secured Captain Bo Horvat's fate. Horvat has been unable to come to an agreement with Canucks management on an extension. Many speculate that this could be due to Miller staying in town. Anyways, aside from Horvat's imminent departure, there's also just the state of the team. Similarly to Eichel, when Miller arrived on the scene, it really seemed like that's when the dysfunction began. Last season, most of us can remember the same deflated start to the season. Fans throwing jerseys onto the ice and booing the home team. Sound familiar? This season again, the same tune is playing around in Vancouver. And unfortunately for Miller and the team, the off-ice issues have now made their way onto the playing surface. The first altercation between Miller and his teammates took place in November. Miller was getting into a verbal argument with Luke Schenn. Connor Garland thought it was a big enough deal to try and defuse the situation. Secondly, most of us by now have seen Miller's meltdown against Winnipeg. Miller was so angry with his netminder Colin Delia for not getting off the ice for an empty net advantage that he slammed his stick onto the goalpost and started spewing profanity. After being asked about the incident, Miller didn't seem to care and deflected things back onto the media. Even though if we glance at his stats, they'll show he's been productive, one has to ask, is the extra baggage truly even worth it anymore?